Sometime in the dead silence between one heartbeat and the next, the storm swallowed the Colorado mountains whole, and Sarah Chen felt the cabin tremble beneath her boots as if the wilderness itself were warning her to run. Snow hammered the roof like 1,000 fists, shaking loose frost that drifted across the floor in ghostly ribbons. Her breath came sharp, fogging in the air as she braced one hand against her swollen belly and the other on the wooden counter to steady herself. 8 months pregnant, exhausted and isolated 3 miles from the nearest road, she had thought this remote cabin would offer peace, one final place to breathe before motherhood began. But now, with the wind screaming like something alive and the walls around her shifting with unnatural creaks, peace felt like a distant memory. The fire sputtered low, shadows stretching long across the room as the storm outside climbed toward a deadly fury. And somewhere beneath that howl, beneath the rattling windows and groaning floorboards, something scratched. Not wildly, not randomly, but with intention. A slow, deliberate pattern tracing its way behind the stones. Sarah straightened, instincts forged in special forces sharpening her senses like steel. She whispered to the child inside her, promising safety she wasn't sure she could deliver, and stepped quietly toward the sound. Nothing about this storm felt natural. Nothing about this cabin felt abandoned. And as another long scrape dragged along the wall, Sarah realized this night would not just test her survival skills. It would test the very limits of her soul. The scratching traveled like a whispering heartbeat inside the walls, moving from the fireplace stones to the floorboards beneath her feet with unsettling precision. Sarah gripped the flashlight, its cold metal trembling in her hand, and swept the beam across the dim cabin interior. Every corner carried the weight of years. Old timber darkened with smoke, a sagging couch tucked beneath frosted windows, shelves lined with canned food left by strangers whose names she'd never know. Yet nothing explained the intelligence behind that sound. Animals didn't tap in patterns. Animals didn't pause when she moved. She crouched, leaning her ear toward the baseboards, feeling her own pulse accelerate as the noise grew louder, then suddenly stopped, so abruptly that the silence pressed into her ears like a physical force. A rustle followed, then breathing, slow, steady, impossibly close. Sarah rose, her muscles shifting into the familiar rhythm of combat readiness despite her swollen belly. Her body no longer moved like the soldier she once was, but her mind still calculated angles, timing, escape routes. Outside, the storm slammed into the cabin again, sending a plume of powder through a crack in the window frame. She turned toward the bedroom, just as something thumped overhead. Heavy, intentional, moving with purpose across the ceiling beams toward her. The beams creaked under weight that clearly wasn't from a raccoon or squirrel. Sarah's breath caught as dust drifted down in thin streams. Something wasn't trapped. Something was traveling. And unlike the storm raging outside, whatever moved above her had been inside long before she arrived. She backed slowly into the main room, careful not to let the floorboards betray her position. The fire burned low, a thin orange glow pulsing across the log walls like a heartbeat struggling to survive. She added a log with steady hands, forcing the flames to rise, forcing the shadows to retreat. But light revealed something she had missed. Beneath the kitchen sink, a 2-foot circular hole cut perfectly, smooth at the edges, disappearing into darkness. A tunnel. A passage deliberately carved through the cabin's bones. Her breath hitched. This wasn't a flaw in construction, it was access. Evidence of someone who had moved freely here unseen for months or more. The scratching returned, now from 3 separate places, behind the wall, beneath the floor, and above her, closing in like a predator studying its prey. Then a new sound slid through the cabin, soft and broken. A voice. "Help me, please." She spun toward the wall where the voice trembled from between the boards. Her hands flew for tools, a hammer, a screwdriver, anything to dismantle the panel sealing someone inside. She pried it open one nail at a time, muscles shaking from effort and fear, until a gap revealed a pale, shivering face. A woman, gaunt and frozen, crawled out into Sarah's arms. "He trapped me," she gasped. "The owner, he lives in the walls. He's coming back." As the woman sobbed into her shoulder, headlights cut through the storm outside. An engine growled, footsteps crunched through snow. Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears. The storm wasn't her enemy. Something far worse was approaching the door. The door rattled under the weight of a heavy fist, snow blowing inward as the handle jerked repeatedly. "Open up!" a man's voice shouted, cold. Controlled and far too calm for the chaos outside. Sarah dragged the stranger she'd rescued toward the living room, motioning her to hide behind the couch while she gripped the iron poker like a weapon. Another impact splintered the wood. Sarah retreated to the fireplace corner, her breath steadying as adrenaline carved clarity into her thoughts. When the door finally burst inward, a tall figure stepped through the blizzard. Hooded, snow-dusted, boots planted like a hunter reclaiming his territory. His gaze swept the room, settling on the fresh pry marks on the wall. "You should have left her where she was," he murmured, stepping further inside. The rescued woman whimpered behind the couch. Sarah surged forward, slamming the poker across his arm before he could pull the knife hidden beneath his coat. He staggered but did not fall, his lips curling into something between pain and admiration. "Didn't expect a fighter," he spit. Footsteps crunched outside, another presence approaching. 2 shadows. 2 threats. The woman behind the couch shook uncontrollably. "There's more of them," she whispered, voice cracking. "He isn't alone." Sarah felt her stomach knot as a contraction tightened across her abdomen, sharp, sudden, too early. She gripped the counter to steady herself as the second man stepped into the doorway, snow swirling around him like a cloak. "Let's make this easy," he said. But Sarah had survived worse than storms and madmen. And when the cabin's ceiling groaned above them, all 3 turned upward, just as something inside the walls began moving again. The sound slithered through the cabin like a living thread, scratching, tapping, crawling in patterns too deliberate to belong to any animal. The 2 intruders stiffened, their confidence cracking as the noise grew louder, circling them from every direction. Sarah saw fear flash through the taller man's eyes. "It's awake," he whispered. The shorter one backed toward the hallway, scanning the walls with frantic jerks of his head. "You said you handled it," he hissed at his partner. "You said the walls were sealed." Sarah's grip tightened around the poker as she realized the truth. Whatever lived here didn't serve them, it hunted them. A panel in the ceiling buckled, dust spiraled down. The shorter intruder raised his flashlight just as the boards above him snapped. Something pale and humanoid dropped from the crawl space, limbs folding like a grotesque marionette. The scream that tore from its throat made the lights flicker. The taller man lunged at Sarah in panic, but she sidestepped with practiced precision. The creature seized his throat with elongated fingers, lifting him effortlessly as he clawed at its grip. Sarah didn't wait. She grabbed the burning log from the fire and thrust it toward the monster. Its skin bubbled where flames touched, its grip faltering long enough for the dying man to collapse. The second intruder ran, disappearing into the storm, leaving blood tracks in the snow. But the creature's focus had shifted. It turned toward Sarah, head tilting, breath rasping like frost on glass. and as another contraction tore through her body, she realized her greatest fight would collide with the moment she could least afford it. Her water broke in a rush of warmth against the freezing floorboards. Pain rippled through her abdomen, tightening like a vice as she backed away from the creature inch by inch. The fire cast trembling light across its translucent form, revealing veins twisting beneath its thin, stretched skin. It stalked her with unsettling patience, as if it understood exactly how vulnerable she was, how every step cost her strength she couldn't spare. She grabbed the flare gun from her emergency pack, flipping the safety with shaking fingers. When the creature lunged, she fired. A red flare exploded across its torso, erupting into brilliant fire that sent it shrieking backward into the wall. Its claws tore gouges through the wooden planks as it writhed in agony. But the fire also revealed something else, multiple sets of pale eyes blinking from the cracks in the walls. Dozens. The storm hadn't driven them out. It had brought them to life. Sarah stumbled toward the bathroom, heart pounding as she barricaded herself inside, dragging shelves, towels, anything with weight to the door. Claws scraped the other side, boards splintered. The walls shook as the creatures swarmed. "Not yet," she whispered through clenched teeth, feeling another contraction seize her entire torso. Her baby pressed low, ready, urgent. She punctured the small propane canister near the sink, letting gas fill the room. Water spilled across the floor from the broken pipe. She raised the last flare. The door cracked open, pale limbs forcing their way through. Sarah closed her eyes, whispered one last promise to the child within her, and pulled the ignition cord. The explosion tore through the bathroom in a flash of white-hot light, blasting Sarah backward into the cast. Iron tub as fire rolled across the ceiling. The water on the floor prevented the flames from swallowing her whole, but the heat scorched her skin, filling her nose with the sharp sting of burning ammonia and melting wood. The creatures shrieked, high, keening sounds that pierced the smoke. Their limbs thrashed wildly as the blast forced them back, their pale bodies catching fire like tinder. Sarah coughed, dragging herself onto her elbows, eyes burning as she crawled through the hole the explosion had torn in the exterior wall. The blizzard wind struck her like a hammer, cold, brutal, purifying. Snow clung to her hair, her clothing, her blood-slicked skin. Her contractions came fast now, each one stealing her breath, forcing her to her knees. The helicopter lights cut through the storm, a pale beam of salvation as rescuers descended on cables, voices shouting her name through loudspeakers. She waved an arm weakly, collapsing as pain overwhelmed her, but strong hands caught her before she hit the snow. They lifted her into the harness, securing her as the cabin burned behind them, smoke rising, flames crackling, creatures retreating into darkness like ghosts dissolving into the storm. As they hoisted her upward, Sarah looked down one final time. Through the broken walls she saw them, dozens of pale shapes, still watching, still waiting, retreating back into their hidden labyrinth. The mountain had its secrets, and tonight she had survived them. High above the storm, wrapped in blankets and strapped into the rescue chopper, Sarah finally let her body surrender. The roar of the blades drowned the chaos below, and for the first time in days, she felt warmth seep back into her bones. Paramedics rushed to stabilize her, but she clung to one truth through the haze of pain and exhaustion. She and her child had lived through something the world would never fully believe. Outside the window, dawn broke over the snow-buried peaks, turning the mountains gold as the storm faded behind them. In that quiet glow, Sarah closed her eyes and felt her baby stir, alive and safe. Whatever waited inside those walls would haunt the mountain for years to come. But she had carved her way through the darkness, fought claw against fire, and emerged unbroken. And as listeners drift with her into that final breath of calm, after every scream, every shadow, every heartbeat of fear, she leaves you with a simple reminder. Surviving the darkness is the bravest story any of us can tell. If this journey pulled you in, if you felt your pulse rise with every heartbeat of hers, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that pull you into the storm and guide you back out again. And before you go, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are right now?